Hello everybody and welcome back. Today we've got a couple of things to talk about, but first, a couple of announcements. There is a poll currently up on Patreon as far as where we should go for the future of this. We've got some electronics we can do, we've got some MDF cutouts we can do, we can keep making more panels, we can get into CAD design, circuitry. Go head over and check out the poll on Patreon, and if you guys want to vote on what you think we should work on next, because there's a lot of options. We're kind of at a crossroads. We can do some of them, we can do all of them, we can do a little bit of each of them. So there's kind of a crossroads, a lot of different directions we can take going forward, and I'm definitely curious about what you guys think going forward. What do you think is actually going to be the best idea, and what are you guys most curious about? Alright, so getting to today's problem, how are we going to wire the cockpit? So there are going to be hundreds and hundreds of wires, and I might be able to fit the whole thing on a single layer, but the problem is, if you guys look just from this is 4 connections worth of wires. We can have this whole thing plus the other side plus multiple layers, and that's just a ton of wires to even break out. And I don't want to use these breadboards because they're not super reliable, so I do have to do the soldering. But how do I do that? Because honestly, these are pretty hard to... I guess I could just mount breadboard after breadboard and do some breakout like that. But then where do I put all the wiring? Because for one of these, I can't fit it within even 8 just channels. It would be super hard to do, plus a lot of these interact with each other, plus a lot of them have to break out into a single, well, into Arduino Leonardos, and yeah. So how do I get all these wires in an organized method to all the gates, circuitry, and logic that I have to do, and eventually into the actual board itself while receiving power, while getting control inputs, while getting everything that it needs? That's the current question that I have. And one of the things that I found out, which makes me think that potentially this could be a much bigger challenge than I thought, is that DCS will only allow you 128 button inputs per joystick device. And in Arduino, I can do the circuitry and I can do the logic to get 4,000 or more buttons into a single Arduino with 20 pins in and out. But how am I supposed to do that with only 128 inputs? So for this one, I think I'm going to need 1 for the left, 1 for the right, potentially 2 for the center, and potentially even an additional one just for the HOTAS, so the throttle and the stick. Well, for the throttle on this one, for the stick maybe down the road. But if you guys know of any way to do multiple joystick libraries on an Arduino and actually have it register as multiple devices so that we can output 128 buttons from the same Arduino with a second joystick controller and make it think that it's a second hardware device so that Windows and DCS will interpret them as 2 different devices, definitely let me know in the comments below. That's something I haven't been able to figure out, and I'm going to keep looking into, but I'm not sure it's going to happen, so I might need 4, 5, 6 Arduinos, which is not a massive difference compared to everything that we've been going through so far. It just means some custom programming and some other stuff, but that might also be a perk for you guys, because the left console entirely might just be run off of one Arduino, so if you guys are interested in just one left console, you can just have that one piece and have it run off of one Arduino, and not have to have the entire right console to have the whole everything. So it would make the brain box a little simpler in a way, kinda? Maybe not. But if you guys are interested in that, and keeping just all the sections so that one USB goes to the left console, one USB goes to the right console, 1 or 2 USBs goes from the center, the throttle goes to one, stuff like that, definitely let me know in the comments below on that as well. Or if you can figure out how to do a single Arduino and multiple joysticks out of it and get valid outputs out and Windows not crashing and thinking that it's not a valid device, definitely let me know. That's something I'm super curious about and having a bit of trouble with. But as far as wiring, I'm going to go through some of the options that I have and some of the ideas that I have. Because if you look at this is just a simple circuit, even on a breadboard, it takes up a small footprint, but it's got a lot of wires coming in and out of it, and it's going to have that for every panel just for the LEDs, plus additional for this for the actual logic and the circuitry for the switches and the buttons and the potentiometers and the rotary encoders and everything else. And on that note, the rotary encoders I think have to be on all the time, because to actually interpret that swing in voltage that it does and actually read that change, I think I have to always be listening to it, because if I'm switching through and I only listen to it a tenth of the time, I'm probably going to miss that voltage change, and that's going to be a problem. So I might have to do rotary encoders all the way on, which significantly limits the number of inputs that I can use, because they essentially require a dedicated channel for every rotary input, unless I do something funky. But hopefully I can fit all of that on the Arduinos. With 128 inputs, I might actually have enough free lanes that I can do that. But we'll definitely have to see. That's going to be a tricky one to at least figure out. But if that's an option, definitely going to go with it. So, as far as options and organizing things, the first solution is literally just to take these breadboards and just wire everything, and then take something like a JST connector and have it above it, so that way I can put a JST connector out of this, plug it into the breadboard, and just have a connection there. Another option is to break it out like this, just into its own breadboard, and then hop that, either do its own circuitry on there with something potentially gigantic like one of these, and just throw a whole lot of circuits on it, just essentially mount it behind, hop into it, just keep running logic over, and just do a whole lot of jumpers. It's going to be a super messy board, super complicated, a lot of densely packed parts, and honestly a lot of work, because this entire thing might be logic gates. We might have to use even more than this. We might have to have 2 of these deep just for a single circuit. So that is definitely a, not quite concern, but something that could be super tricky to do. And honestly, that's a whole lot of soldering in a very small space, and every time I make a change, I somehow have to get this out of the cockpit, keep adding components, and then put it back in the cockpit without having broken anything that I did before. So something like this, little simpler, little smaller, I could just leave that one piece of the cockpit and just keep adding them. Something like this that kind of does the monolithic approach, I would have to take this out every time I add a component. So for something like this, not quite as much of a fan of. These little smaller guys are a lot easier to just put in the cockpit and leave, but they do take up a bigger footprint. I can cut them smaller, do stuff like that. So those are essentially 2 of the options that we have. And another option is to actually use these little Arduino Shield PCBs, and the Arduino just goes through it. You put in the header pins and you literally just plug this into the top of the Arduino, and we can do all of our logic in here. The hard part is getting things between the boards. So things like, we're gonna have a transistor going out to 8. I can't fit 8 transistors on here, and I've tried, and it's really hard to even solder on there, and usually something goes wrong. It's very difficult to do, and it's not something I want to do again. So passing data up and down between these little cards would be super tricky. Doable, but very tricky. It essentially have to require jumper wires coming up and around, and then it would also make it so that every one of these is layered, and if something goes wrong on the bottom one, you have to take off all of them to get to the bottom one, but then it's stuck, which means, do you use connectors? How do you do it? So if you guys have ideas on how I can vertically jumper these and literally just stack them on top of each other and actually get data between them, definitely let me know, because that would be a relatively modular, easy-ish idea. Using a JST connector that would come out and go up to the next level might be an option, but not necessarily the best option to use something like this. But then again, the other ones so far haven't been phenomenal either, so this could be a very valid option. And the other one is to literally just go with just straight PCBs and just wire on them. Kind of similar to this guy, cut them to the size I need, pick a PCB that's about the size I need, do stuff like that. Or even on top of that, I can use a board like this, which these guys are solderless breadboards, no connections, no solder, nothing. It's literally just to hold your parts in place. These guys have little circles that make it a little easier to solder to. It takes to the solder a little better. And this is literally a breadboard just to solder to. So it's this guy or this guy in a PCB format. So the vertical rails are all connected, which would mean that I can't pack parts anywhere near as densely, but I have a whole lot more inputs and outputs to every part. So just like these breadboards, I could put a transistor on the center and then have something like I could have 5 outputs or 4 outputs and actually jumper them to other information, stuff like that. And if you see on the bottom, it makes it really easy to hop voltage and other information, so it just makes it a lot simpler. So I like this option more than just a generic breadboard. Just because this makes it a lot easier, but this also is going to require a whole lot more space. So behind it, I can't just keep stacking parts backwards, at least not very easily. So this is going to take up a whole lot bigger footprint on the actual base plate, and I only have so much room there. I can make it bigger, but I don't really want to, so going up another level and putting more of these would actually be a feasible option. I might just run out of space and have to do it anyways, but these require more space, more components. They're just bigger in general, but they're much easier to work on. I can literally just take a PCB or a breadboard design and just copy it onto here and just solder everything on. So it makes it very easy to go from prototyping and breadboards to a breadboard, just a soldered one with much better connections and a little more permanent, mostly permanent. So this is a solution that I actually like, and you can buy bigger ones. I have some more bigger red ones coming. This is a half-size PCB, or yeah, a half-size board similar to these guys, about the same in size. But I do have some full ones coming. This guy's new, which is why I didn't do all that on here. But it's the red ones that I have coming are full length, so that is definitely an option, and you will be seeing more of this guy in the future. He's pretty new, but I'm gonna have to test him out, make sure that all the actual connectors work and stuff like that. But these guys are all super neat, so we're gonna play with that. We're gonna dive into that later. That'll be a fun one. But yeah, so out of these options, you guys have any good ideas? What do you actually think we should start doing wiring on? Should we just do little tiny modular stuff and try and pack all the logic for one module on just a small little PCB? That way it's just set it and forget it. Do we do it on something like this? Do I wait to do any of the wiring until I have enough to fill up a PCB? Does space really matter? What are you guys' thoughts on this? Do you like the direct Arduino Leonardo, the breadboards, the standard PCB soldering that doesn't have any connections, the solderless ones, which I have, but not super huge fan of them because stuff doesn't stick? Or should we just go with this monolithic just monster? Yeah, that's the current dilemma that I'm trying to solve. It's not the easiest one, but I'm kind of working through it. Gonna potentially prototype on some of them, but I don't have a lot of these boards. So like these guys, don't have a ton of. These guys I have a couple of, but not a massive amount, so I would need to buy more if I went down that option. These guys I don't have a ton of either, but I have a lot of various sizes, which means I could probably make a lot of them essentially, or I can cut them smaller, stuff like that. So, I've been rambling for a little while. Definitely hop down in the comments. Let me know, one, the Arduino, do you know how to do multiple, or do you guys have any ideas on how to do multiple hardware devices off of a single Arduino and how to spoof that and have multiple joystick libraries and have it accept the inputs? 2 is, do you guys have any good wiring tips, advice, or suggestions on how we can clean up this kind of wiring, because there are going to be wires everywhere in the cockpit, and I've always found that if you can hop on wiring first and you can actually get it into a manageable state from the beginning, it's magnitudes easier to continue with the wiring, and it's much easier to organize and you get much less overwhelmed, because I've got 24 volt lines coming over, I've got 5 volt lines coming over, I have a control voltage from the right side of the cockpit going to the left and the front and the right. So that's going to be all over the place. Plus we have all of our individual LED logic, plus our individual controller logic, plus the actual Arduinos, plus all of their breakout logic, and all the switch logic, all the interpretation, everything else. So if you guys have any good ideas on wiring and how to just route it around the physical thing, definitely let me know. Zip ties, sleeves, mounts that I can put in there, anything you guys think of, just let me know. Anything and everything will be considered because this is a hard problem. Wiring is always one of the more tricky things about electronics, especially when you go up to scale and you get it off of a breadboard and you actually go into something large. Everybody goes with PCBs because wiring is a nightmare, and that's an option. Going to a PCB and designing the electronics is an option, but I'm a little too into the prototyping stages at the moment to really design a PCB and just go with it. It's a potential. I know they're a lot cheaper to make. They're a lot cheaper to just get in small batches. So definitely an option I'm going to probably look into. But for now, with the stuff that I have available to me, wiring, and then what do you guys think of the actual options for how I'm going to do the logic and the controllers? Where am I going to put transistors? And where should this actually go physically? And what types of breadboards should we use? What types of interfaces? If you guys have ideas on those, definitely let me know too. I will probably be doing some prototyping, but the layout is going to be tricky. And thank you guys for joining. Hop over to the Patreon page. Link is in the description below. If you guys have any interest in helping decide where this channel really goes and what we dive into next and where we really go, definitely put some comments down there and vote on the poll, and we'll see you guys in the next episode. My legs have fell asleep. Ow, that hurts. I need to do more Japanese. I don't know how they do that. My legs are completely asleep. Random resistor pack. Waiting for feeling to come back so I can turn out the GoPro. Anyways, thanks for sticking around for the shenanigans. We'll see you guys in the next episode.